What is going on with the UK, the European, the US car industry right now? It feels almost, you might say, like Carmageddon.
For more than a century, European cars defined excellence. BMW, Mercedes, Audi, Volkswagen. These weren't just brands, they were global status symbols. If you wanted the best, you bought European. It was simple. But today, that story is collapsing. The very companies that invented the modern car are now at risk of losing the car business altogether. And shockingly, the threat isn't coming from Detroit or Tokyo. It's coming from China. Europe made one of the costliest mistakes in modern business, a €500 billion miscalculation. The numbers are brutal, the stakes are massive, and time is running out. To understand Europe's crisis, you need to see the raw data. In the first 7 months of 2025, EU car sales dropped by 0.7%. That may sound small, but think about it this way. It's like Netflix losing subscribers during the golden age of streaming. Since 2019, Western Europe has lost 2.5 million car sales per year, the equivalent of wiping out the entire Spanish car market every single year. In just the first half of 2025, Europe sold 1.56 million fewer cars than in 2019, a period when sales should have been booming. Why? Because the global auto industry isn't shrinking, it's transforming. Electric and hybrid cars now make up 60% of all European sales, up from 51% just a year before. Germany's electric market jumped 38%, Belgium rose 17%, and the Netherlands grew 6%. The demand shift is clear. People want electricity. But here's the catch. European brands aren't the ones profiting. Chinese companies doubled their market share in Europe in only 6 months. BYD, a name barely known in Europe 5 years ago, sold over 70,000 cars in just half a year, a 311% increase. The giants of Europe are watching the ground disappear beneath them. Europe's leaders thought they had a master plan. By banning gas cars by 2035, they would force the world into the electric era with European companies leading the charge. On paper, it looked brilliant. Automakers would either transition to zero-emission vehicles or pay massive penalties. But in 2025, reality has come crashing in. Mercedes CEO Ola Källenius recently called for a reality check, warning that the ICE ban isn't practical. Weak demand, sky-high costs, and a charging network that barely exists are the real problems. Now, German car companies and their trade unions, usually at odds, are joining forces. They're begging Brussels to delay or water down the ban, but they aren't the only voices. Over 150 leaders in Europe's electric vehicle ecosystem, battery makers, charging firms, and clean energy companies are fighting back. They insist that Europe must stay the course. Any retreat, they argue, would scare off investors and hand China an even bigger advantage. This has turned into a tug-of-war between regulation and survival. On one side, automakers are drowning in fines. On the other, policymakers demand a cleaner future. The ambition is real, but the problem is that ambition wasn't backed by infrastructure, supply chains, or cost control. The real enemy of Europe's car industry isn't China. It's cost. Every part of the European system is expensive, from outdated factories to high labor wages, from union agreements to soaring energy prices. Europe built the most costly car-making system in the world. Here's a shocking number. BYD can build an EV in Europe for about $25,000. That's already 25% more expensive than building the same car in China, but it's still $10,000 cheaper than what most European companies can manage for similar models. $10,000 per car isn't a gap, it's a canyon. Meanwhile, the average price of a new car in Germany has hit 56 yuan, $700. In France, Italy, and Spain, prices are just as high. Ordinary buyers are being priced out of the market. Factories built for yesterday's demand now sit half-empty. Suppliers face an impossible choice: upgrade at massive cost, move operations abroad, or shut down. Europe still relies on imported lithium-ion batteries, leaving it vulnerable to global price swings. Legacy costs are crushing the system, while China's newcomers operate with clean balance sheets and modern plants. Chinese car companies didn't just enter the European market, they rewrote the rules. In early 2025, their market share nearly doubled. BYD's registrations alone skyrocketed over 300%. Their secret weapon isn't just cheap labor, it's an integrated supply chain. Take CATL, one of China's battery giants. They're building a factory in Hungary capable of producing 100 gigawatt-hours annually, enough to power millions of cars. They won't just supply Chinese brands, they'll supply anyone. Suddenly, Europe's most critical component, the battery, is controlled by outsiders. Chinese companies aren't stopping at imports. They're building factories in Hungary and Turkey. Once production is local, tariffs vanish, logistics costs drop. And overnight they stop looking like foreign competitors and start looking like domestic manufacturers. Even more worrying, they're planning for the future. BYD and others are launching luxury brands by 2027. They're building charging networks and service centers. They're not here for quick wins. They're here to dominate the long game. Europe perfected the premium business model. China studied it, copied it, and is now scaling it cheaper, faster, and sometimes even better. Europe thought it could defend itself with tariffs. In 2025, the EU slapped duties of 17% to 38% on Chinese EVs, plus an existing 10% import tax. Some cars now face nearly 50% extra costs. On paper, that looks like a shield. In reality, it's a boomerang. Stellantis CEO Carlos Tavares admitted the truth. These tariffs are pushing Chinese firms to build inside Europe. Once their factories are in Hungary, Poland, or Turkey, the tariffs vanish, and European brands are left competing against newer, more efficient plants right next door. Even with tariffs, many Chinese models remain profitable. Their supply chains are so lean, their costs so low, they can absorb the hit and still undercut European rivals. Worse, Chinese firms are doubling down on hybrids, which face lower tariffs than pure EVs. Meanwhile, Europe's own champions, Volkswagen, Mercedes, BMW and Stellantis, all depend heavily on China for sales and production. They can't afford a trade war, yet they can't win under the current rules either. The crisis isn't theoretical anymore, it's hitting the ground. European factories are shutting down. Volkswagen put its Brussels site up for sale. Stellantis, Valeo and Bosch, giants of industry, are announcing closures and freezes, especially at plants built for outdated gas car technology. Suppliers are collapsing too. Over 60% report the same problem: high costs, too much capacity, and not enough demand. Jobs are disappearing now. Families in Germany, France, Italy, and the UK, who've built cars for generations, are suddenly facing layoffs. Europe's car industry isn't just about cars, it's about economies. Germany's economy is powered by automobiles. Millions of jobs, billions in tax revenue, and entire regions depend on this one sector. If Europe loses the car business, it doesn't just lose pride. It risks an economic earthquake. There are a few bright spots. Volkswagen is fighting back with budget EVs around $25,000. Renault is switching to cheaper batteries. BMW is focusing on high-tech luxury. But these are defensive moves in a race that's already underway. So, is this the end for Europe's car kings? Not necessarily. The story isn't finished, but the window is closing fast. Europe still has talent, engineering skill, brand power, and global recognition. What it lacks is time and a unified strategy. If Europe can lower production costs, secure its own battery supply chain, and expand charging networks, it still has a fighting chance. The industry needs governments, unions, and companies to work together in ways they've never done before. The alternative is watching the crown of the auto world quietly pass to China. Europe once ruled the roads. Its brands were more than machines. They were symbols of prestige and power. But today, those same brands are facing their greatest test. The numbers are grim, the competition is relentless, and the mistakes are painfully clear. Europe built the stage for the electric revolution, but forgot to protect its own players. Now Chinese companies are seizing the spotlight. The choice is stark: adapt fast or lose the crown. The future of Europe's economy and millions of its workers depends on what happens next. The car game isn't over, but Europe is running out of time.